What do a pop superstar billionaire and an opera diva from the 1950s have in common? More than you might think. Because both Taylor Swift and Maria Callas were the greatest singers in the world in their time. Both were adored. Both dominated their musical scene. And both earned incredible amounts of money that were extraordinary for their era. But which of them was the richest star of her time? That's what I'm going to reveal in this video. So make sure to watch until the end of the video, because the final comparison might surprise you. And if you enjoy learning about the world's historical figures and modern icons, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode of World's Timeless Titans. Was it the modern pop icon whose tours generate billions of dollars, who was richer? Or the opera legend who 70 years ago was already earning fees that other singers could only dream of? The answer is not as obvious as you might think. Because to answer that question, we first have to understand just how big these two artists really were. And that's why we begin in the present. With a singer who didn't just change the pop world, but may have changed the music industry itself. When Taylor Swift was born in Pennsylvania in 1989, no one could have imagined that she would one day become one of the most successful musicians in history. Her career began surprisingly modestly. As a teenager, she moved with her family to Nashville, the center of American country music. There, she tried to establish herself as a songwriter. What set her apart from many other young artists was a skill that would later become her trademark. She wrote her own songs. And those songs were personal, very personal. While many pop stars sing fairly generic love songs, Swift tells specific stories from her own life about relationships, heartbreak, friendships, and growing up. Especially young fans felt directly connected to that honesty. Her first album was released in 2006, and it quickly made her a new face in the country music scene. But the real breakthrough came 2 years later with the album Fearless. Suddenly, Taylor Swift was no longer a newcomer. She was a superstar. Songs like Love Story played on radio stations around the world and made her famous far beyond the country music scene. But something important happened at that moment. Instead of staying in this successful genre, Swift slowly began to change her musical style. With each album, she moved a little further away from traditional country music, until one album completely redefined her career. 1989. This album was no longer country. It was pure pop. And it was a massive success. Millions of copies sold, worldwide hits, and a tour that proved Taylor Swift was no longer just a singer. She was a global pop star. But perhaps the most interesting part of her career happened not on stage, but behind the scenes of the music industry. Because Swift became involved in a conflict that is existential for many artists and can completely ruin careers. Who actually owns the music? The master recordings of her first albums were sold, without her having control over the decision. Many artists would have simply accepted that. Taylor Swift did not. She made a decision that almost no one expected. She simply re-recorded her own albums. By doing that, she regained control over her music. And at the same time, she sent a powerful message to the entire music industry. Artists do not always have to accept the rules that are imposed on them. They can change them. But while Swift today fills stadiums and breaks streaming records, it is worth looking back to a time when musical fame looked very different. A time when the biggest stages in the world were not dominated by pop stars, but by opera houses. And one singer was so famous that her name is still legendary today. Maria Callas. Before we continue, take a second and let me know in the comments. Who do you think was richer in her time? Taylor Swift or Maria Callas? I'm really curious to see what you think. And if you enjoy this type of comparison between historical legends and modern icons, make sure to like the video so more people can discover the channel. Before we can compare Maria Callas with Taylor Swift, we need to take a short journey back in time. Back to a world without streaming, without TikTok, without pop stars performing in stadiums with massive LED stages. In the 1950s, musical fame looked completely different. The biggest stars in the world were not pop singers. They were opera singers. And one of them stood above all the others. Her name was Maria Callas. Maria Callas was born in New York in 1923, the daughter of Greek immigrants. But her career did not begin in America. It began in Greece, where her family moved back during her youth. Very early on, it became clear that her voice was extraordinary. Not just powerful, not just technically brilliant, but something much rarer. Her voice had a dramatic intensity that captivated audiences immediately. Even as a young singer, she was able to perform roles normally sung by much more experienced performers. But what truly made Maria Callas special was not only her voice, it was her acting. In opera, singers had often stood relatively still on stage. The focus was mainly on perfect vocal technique. Callas turned that idea upside down. When she performed roles like Tosca or Norma, she acted them with an intensity that audiences had never seen before. Suddenly, the audience felt like they were not just listening to music, but experiencing a real story. And that made her a sensation. Her international breakthrough came at one of the most famous opera houses in the world, La Scala in Milan. In the early 1950s, she became the absolute star there. Within just a few years, she performed on the greatest stages in the world, including the famous Metropolitan Opera House in New York. Newspapers reported on her performances like they were major sporting events. And suddenly, something unusual happened. An opera singer became an international celebrity. But the more famous she became, the more public attention turned toward her private life. One relationship in particular made headlines around the world. Her relationship with the billionaire shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis. The press followed every twist and turn of their romance. And that turned Maria Callas into something that today feels normal, but back then was almost new. An artist whose private life was just as famous as her art. But while her fame continued to grow, something else began to happen. Her voice, the instrument that had made her famous, started to show signs of weakness. Performances were canceled. Critics debated her condition. Fans wondered whether the greatest opera diva of her time had already passed her peak. And this is where the most interesting part of our story begins. Because while Maria Callas was considered the greatest music star of her time, a question later emerged that almost nobody asks today. Did she actually make a lot of money from that fame? Or was the life of an opera legend financially very different from the life of a modern pop star? And this is exactly where our comparison with Taylor Swift becomes really interesting. By the end of this video, you will know which of the two was richer. But if we want to understand who the bigger star really was, it's not enough to look only at album sales or concert audiences. The more important question is actually this: who had the bigger cultural impact? At first glance, the answer might seem obvious. Taylor Swift is everywhere today. Her songs play on the radio, on streaming platforms, and across social media. Millions of fans analyze her lyrics, search for hidden clues, and wait for every new album like it's a global event. When Swift releases an album, it's not just discussed within the music industry, it becomes part of pop culture. Her tours turn into social events. Fans travel across countries, exchange friendship bracelets, and transform concerts into massive communal experiences. Some cities even report measurable economic effects when her tour stops there. In short, Taylor Swift is not just a singer. She's a cultural phenomenon. But if we go back a few decades, we find something surprising. Because Maria Callas was also a cultural phenomenon in her time, just in a completely different world. In the 1950s, opera was one of the most important international art forms, and Callas was its biggest star. Whenever she performed at La Scala or the Metropolitan Opera House, newspapers around the world reported on it. Her interpretations of operatic roles like Norma or Tosca became reference points for an entire generation of singers. Many music historians even say that Callas gave opera something it had partly lost: emotional intensity and dramatic credibility. She turned opera back into theater. But there is another difference that makes this comparison fascinating. Maria Callas changed an art form. Taylor Swift influences an entire pop culture. And much of that difference comes down to the era they lived in. In the 1950s, opera was culturally important, but its audience was relatively limited. Pop music in the 21st century reaches billions of people at the same time. A new Taylor Swift song can be heard worldwide within hours. A Maria Callas performance, on the other hand, was experienced only by those sitting inside the opera house. But here comes the surprising twist in this comparison. Despite these differences, many experts still consider Maria Callas the greatest opera singer of the 20th century. Her influence on singers and opera productions is still visible today. Which means this: Callas may have been the most defining figure of her art form. Swift, meanwhile, is one of the defining figures of modern pop music, but she shares that stage with many other major artists. That's why this category is surprisingly close. If we compare only their impact within their own musical worlds, Maria Callas might even come out ahead. But if we ask a global question, who reached and influenced more people culturally? then it's hard to look past Taylor Swift. Her music, her fan culture, and her media presence make her one of the biggest cultural stars of our time. So this round goes narrowly to Taylor Swift. But cultural influence is only part of the story. Before we get to the money, let us look at another kind of power. Which of these two stars had the greater influence on politics? Some stars deliberately stay out of politics. Others use their enormous reach very intentionally. And here we see a clear difference between our two singers. Let us begin again with the present. For a long time, Taylor Swift was apolitical. Especially early in her career, she avoided making clear political statements. There were strategic reasons for that. In the American pop industry, many artists try not to alienate parts of their audience, and political positions can quickly divide fans. But that changed in 2018. That year, Swift posted a message on Instagram publicly endorsing a political candidate. She supported Democratic candidate Phil Bredesen in the state of Tennessee. For many fans, this was unexpected. For the first time, Swift openly positioned herself against a Republican politician, the Senator Marsha Blackburn. The impact was enormous. Within 24 hours, according to voter organizations, hundreds of thousands of young people registered to vote. It revealed something many had only suspected before. Taylor Swift has political influence that extends far beyond music. Since then, she has repeatedly spoken about social and political issues. She supported the election of Joe Biden in the United States presidential election 2020 and criticized former President Donald Trump several times. She has also spoken openly about LGBTQ rights and gender equality. In other words, Swift now uses her platform intentionally to communicate political messages. But several decades earlier, things looked very different. Maria Callas lived in a time when artists were much more cautious about political statements. In the 1950s and the 1960s, it was often considered risky for international stars to speak openly about politics. Opera houses were cultural institutions, and they preferred to remain politically neutral. Callas herself rarely took public political positions. Her influence came more indirectly, through the powerful people she was connected with. The most important figure here was the Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis. Onassis was one of the richest men of his time and moved in circles of international politics and business. He had connections with heads of state, powerful entrepreneurs, and members of the American elite. Later, he even married Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, the widow of former US President John F. Kennedy. Through her relationship with Onassis, Maria Callas also moved within these circles. She attended elite social events, met political figures, and became part of an international network where art, business, and politics were closely connected. But one crucial difference remains. While Taylor Swift actively communicates political messages, Maria Callas herself remained largely politically neutral. She was a cultural icon, but not a political voice, which makes the result in this category relatively clear. When it comes to direct political influence, Taylor Swift comes out ahead. To understand how big a star really was, it's helpful to look from another angle. Not just how successful was someone, but also how were they viewed by society? Who had the greater social prestige? In the 1950s, Maria Callas belonged to a cultural elite that carried enormous social status. Opera was not just entertainment, it was high culture. People who regularly attended opera often belonged to influential circles in politics, business, and culture. And Callas was right at the center of that world. Her performances at LA Scala or the Metropolitan Opera House were major social events. Celebrities, diplomats, and powerful business figures sat in the audience. Newspapers reported extensively on opening nights. Her relationship with Aristotle Onassis brought her even deeper into international high society. But there was also a limit to this kind of fame. Opera reached influential audiences, but not mass audiences. And this is where Taylor Swift is very different. Swift is a global pop star. Her fans come from virtually every social group. Teenagers, families, students, politicians. Her music reaches millions of people simultaneously. That creates a different kind of reputation. She is less an icon of elite society and more a figure millions of people identify with. Fans don't just admire her. Many feel personally connected to her. But social prestige also depends on what someone does with their influence. And that brings us to philanthropy. Maria Callas participated in several charity concerts and supported cultural institutions. Many of these events raised money for artistic or charitable causes, but her engagement remained relatively limited. Taylor Swift's philanthropy is much broader. Throughout her career, she has donated large amounts of money to disaster relief, education programs, and organizations supporting equality. During the COVID pandemic, she also helped many musicians and event workers who suddenly lost their income. And she uses her enormous platform to bring attention to social issues. When Swift supports an organization, millions of people hear about it, which is why this category also goes to Taylor Swift. Before we answer the question about wealth, we need to talk about something that is often even more important for artists than money or politics: their legacy. What they will be remembered for in music history. And here our comparison becomes especially interesting. Both singers achieved something very few artists ever accomplish. They changed their musical world. For opera lovers, the name Maria Callas still comes up first when discussing the greatest singers of all time. Not just because of her voice, but because of the way she interpreted opera. Before Callas, technical perfection was often the most important goal. Callas brought drama back to opera. She turned performances into powerful, emotional storytelling. Many directors say she helped redefine opera as true musical theater. Meanwhile, Taylor Swift represents a completely different legacy. She has shaped both modern pop music and the modern music business. Her decision to re-record her albums changed the conversation about artists' rights. And her songwriting and genre shifts have influenced a new generation of musicians, which means Callas reshaped opera. Swift reshaped pop culture and parts of the music industry. Their legacies are different, but both are enormous. Now we return to the question that started this video. If you enjoyed the video so far, consider subscribing to the channel. Here we regularly compare famous figures from today with legends from the past and ask, who was the richest of their time? To compare Taylor Swift and Maria Callas fairly, we have to remember one thing. Money from different decades cannot be compared directly. $1 in the 1950s was worth far more than $1 today, so we need to adjust for inflation. Let us start with Maria Callas. In the 1950s and the 1960s, she was one of the best-paid opera singers in the world. When she died in 1977, her fortune was estimated at $15 million. Adjusted for inflation, that equals roughly $80 million today, an enormous fortune for an opera singer of her time. Now let us look at the present. Taylor Swift earns money from many more sources: music sales, streaming, huge tours, merchandise, film rights, and ownership of her music catalog. Her tours, especially the Eras Tour, are among the most successful concert projects in music history. Today, her wealth is estimated at roughly $1.3 billion. So the comparison looks like this. Maria Callas, inflation adjusted, about $80 million. Taylor Swift, about $1.3 billion. Which means Taylor Swift is many times richer than Maria Callas ever was. If you enjoyed this comparison, let me know in the comments. Which Titan should we compare next? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming episodes where we compare legendary figures from the past and present. Because history and modern success are more connected than we often realize.